The Toshas Yontif had a special Mishaberach he made for those who didn't talk during davening, I think. There's a special Mishaberach in the Toshas Yontif. Maybe somebody here is familiar with it. It's a famous shtickle. Okay. Yesterday was the Yartet of the Ar Shemeach. So I said over a thought from the Ar Shemeach that I thought you might like. And it was, why is it that by Eidim Zoymin, there's a rule of Kasher Zomam, Veloy Kasher also? The Gemara says it's a chiddush. If you're chayiv misa for attempted murder, you should surely be chayiv misa for committing the murder. So the Meshech Chachma offered a very logical solution. Imagine Reuben is falsely condemned to death because two Eidim came along and said that he was Machal Shabbos. So Reuben's next of kin are going to be very angry and they're going to want revenge. Because they'll look at those two false Eidim that they're murdered. They murdered my father. So we'll go now and hire another set of false Eidim to be massing them, and then they'll get killed. That's only if it's kasher osa. But if it's kasher zomam, we're in the middle of a trial. The two Eidim came and said false testimony, but our father's still alive. We're not angry enough to want those Eidim to get killed. We want to stop this from happening. So instead of hiring Eidei Azoma, we'll only hire Eidei Hakasha, which destroy the evidence, saves their father, but won't kill the two Eidim. So if the Rebbe would have made that it's kasher also as well, then there's that opportunity for revenge, and then it would go back and forth. After they would kill the two Eidim, because they would hire false Eidim to say that they're Zayman, well then now the Eidim's next of kin could now hire Eidim Zayman for these guys, and it would keep on going on, because the passion for revenge will continue. This way, it stops it, because they could only hire Eidei Hazama while they don't really have an interest in getting these Eidim killed. So therefore, they'll do the Eidei Chachar. That was the svara that the Meshech Chacham says.
Very nice. Very nice.
It's your approach. It's a logical approach.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. The teretz I heard goes is very similar to that. I think I don't know who, I can't remember who says it, but why is one set of Eidos stronger than the previous set of Eidos? That's it's 2 against 2. So why should one trump the other one?
Well, we're not commenting on the same thing. Eidei Chasha, there you could have that question. You're saying A happened, and we're saying I was there, A didn't happen. Here, you're saying it happened. I'm not saying it happened or didn't happen. I'm not even commenting on that. I'm just saying that you were here. So you're not directly conflicting my Eidos.
You were with us. Is that what you're saying?
You weren't in Toronto where the crime occurred. You were with us in New York.
That's right. That's the classical case of Eidim Zayman, right?
So they were not directly contradicting their testimony. We're just saying a different piece of testimony, which makes it impossible for them to have seen. But we're not directly contradicting what they're saying.
Okay. But that does contradict what they're saying.
It's a contradiction.
If it's impossible for them to be there,
that's right. But we're not commenting on it directly. Indirectly, our comments are impacted.
Right. Shkaya.
Okay, Shkaya. So let's see the Gemara. So we learned the Mishnah at the bottom of Lavim Beis that talks about when you tie up the lulav like we do. We use lulav leaves. We use lulav leaves because it has to be b'minoi. And we learned that the reason for it is because Rabbi Yehuda holds that lulav tzarech eged, which means that the material with which we tie up the lulav is an integral part of the arba minim. And if you would use a different min, you would now have 5 minim. So therefore, you have to stick to the min halulav. Now, Rava wanted to add another thing. Rava said, he started off the sugya by saying that you don't have to use a lulav leaf to tie a lulav. You can use any part of the lulav tree, any part of the palm tree you can use to tie it up. For instance, sieve is some type of netting, naturally occurring netting material that grows around the decal. You're allowed to use that. That doesn't look anything like a lulav branch, but it is part of the same tree. And then there's the next item is ikra de dikla. Ikra de dikla is whenever you look at the bottom of a decal, you have a hard wooden trunk. It's wood. Rashi explains how you're going to make a tie out of hardwood. So Rashi says if you peel it, if you peel wood, you'll get strips that are somewhat pliable that you could sort of make a fiber out of, that you could tie it up. So Rava said that you could even use other parts of the decal to tie up the lulav, even though it's not actually the same type of leaf. And Rava wanted to prove that because there's a very strong argument against that. If it has to be from the same min, it's logical to say there would be a place to argue that it has to be made out of what the lulav is made out of. Some other part of the lulav really isn't the same. How do you know you extended to say that any part of the tree, even though it's nothing similar to the actual lulav, will be considered minoi to be able to tie up the lulav? So how do I know the civic dikla min de lulav? How do I know that this is considered from the min of the lulav, and therefore you're allowed to tie the lulav with it, according to Yudah? The Tanya, we learned a very interesting halacha. The sukkah's teishu. We have to sit in the sukkah. The halacha is sukkah shall cold over. You're allowed to use a sukkah made out of anything. Divrei Reb Meir, which is how we fear them. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, ein sukkah neheges. Now we're not talking here about the walls, of course. We're talking about the sukkah, the schach. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, ein sukkah neheges ela bedalid minim shebelulav. The only things that you're allowed to use for schach are the dalid minim. You're allowed to use a dasim for schach, a robus for schach, a sroigim for schach, and lulavim for schach. But I didn't listen. And I have a kal v'chomer to prove that you should only be able to use this species for the dalid minim for schach. Because of salt, which is very kuladik. It's a very limitedly applied chiyuv. There is no chiyuv at night to shake lulav, only by day. Nevertheless, nevertheless, we limit the minim that you can use to be mekayim this mitzvah to 4. So sukkah sheneheges beleilas kivayom, sukkah, which is a much more chamer dika type of chiyuv because it applies 24 hours. Einoidin shaloi tehei ela barbas minim. Surely it should have that stringency that it only is kosher if you use these 4 minim. That was the kal v'chomer that Rabbi Yehuda made. And Rabbi Yehuda's position is that you could only use the 4 minim for schach. Amruloi, so his opponents told him, your kal v'chomer is not a good kal v'chomer. Why? This is a new chiddush in Hilchos kal v'chomers. Called in, shata don, chilase lahachmer. Anytime you make a kal v'chomer, which means you're saying if A is more kal, has this chumrah, B, which is more chomer, should surely have this chomer. If the sefer lahakal, if that could lead to a kula, ain't it in. You have to ignore the entire kal v'chomer. A kal v'chomer which could lead to a kula, even though technically the direct kal v'chomer is a chumrah, is disqualified. How could this kal v'chomer lead to a kula? Zok the Gemara on the top of Lamed Zayin and Aleph, because loy matzas arba minim, if you couldn't find dalad minim, you couldn't find any of these 4 species, are you suggesting Yosy batel? You should deny and not do the mitzvah of sukkah? V'atayra amra v'sukkah's teishu shivas yamim. Sukkah shall called over. So therefore, you're making a chumrah by limiting what you're allowed to use for schach. That's going to lead to a kula, because if we don't have access to any of those 4 minim, you're going to be mevatel the mitzvah of sukkah. That's why we disagree. That's why, Dr. Meir, I disagree with your kal v'chomer. And not only that, v'chein be'Ezra, you find by Ezra as well, where he clearly said that you can use any meaning for the sukkah. And we had this pasuk quoted once before. He told the people when they came back to Eretz Yisrael, to Ulahar, go to the mountains. V'aviu alei zayis, bring leaves from the olive tree, v'alei eitz shemen, and olives of eitz shemen. I'm not sure what that is. V'alei hadas, and alei of hadasim, v'alei tamorim, v'alei eitz avos. Some of these are minim, but not all of them. V'asu sukkos kakosu. So you see clearly that Ezra sent them to get minim that were not only exclusively from the Arba minim to build their sukkahs. Rabbi Yehuda Sover, so how is Rabbi Yehuda going to interpret this pasuk? They'll say, Hani ledefanos. All the other minim in the pasuk that are not from the Arba minim were going to be used for the walls. My limitation of only these 4 minim is for the schach, the alehadas, vale tamorim, Balaitz Avois, which were all part of the four minim, Lischach, those are going to be for the Schach. So that's the Machlokes. And why it focuses on Ezra, because I believe the Gemara tells us somewhere that if Moshe Rabbeinu wasn't Mekabel the Torah, Ezra was on such a high level that he could have been Mekabel the Torah. So therefore, it's appropriate that we should be able to use his pasuk to refute a Kal V'chomer that we have from the Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu. Utanan, we have another raya. Misachachin b'nesarim. You could make schach with boards. You allowed to use boards for schach, did Rabbi Yehuda. So if Rabbi Yehuda says specifically you can use boards, and we also know that Rabbi Yehuda holds you're only allowed to make out of the four minim, none of the four minim are boards. A hadas is not a board, and a rav is not a board, an esrog is not a board, and a lulav is not a board. So it must mean that the wood from the tree that these things grow on, which you could make into a board, such as the wood of a dekel tree, is considered one of the minim. Alma siv v'kredidikla mina delulavahu shema mina. So you see, according to Rabbi Yehuda, when he limited the species of what you can make out of schach with to the four minim, he didn't just mean what you directly use for the mitzvah, but he meant any part of those trees. They're all considered part of that min. And therefore, it's logical to argue that you can use the wood of a dekel tree, even though it's not part of the lulav itself, to bind the lulav with. Zok to Gemara. When Rabbi Yehuda, our bas minim in midi achvina loy, did Rabbi Yehuda actually say that you could only build a sukkah out of the four minim? But Tanya, we learned sichacha b'nesarim shal erez. If you used boards that were made out of erez, which are cedar trees, which are not from the four minim, sheyesh ban dalat tfachim. If they had dalat tfachim, we learned earlier that there was a xeris tikra, that according to everybody, if it's more than, according to the way Shmuel learned, if it's more than four tfachim, divra kol psula, both Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir hold that if it's so wide, you make a xeris tikra, meaning if you sit under such a board, you'll sit in your home, because you don't make a distinction between such a large board and a regular ceiling. But ein bam dalat tfachim. What if the boards were between 3 and 4 tfachim? Rabbi Meir Poisel, Rabbi Meir holds that the xeris tikra is as small as a board of 3 tfachim. Rabbi Yehuda machshir. And Rabbi Yehuda holds that if the board is under 4 tfachim, there is no xeris tikra. So right off the bat, we see you used boards of cedar, and Rabbi Yehuda was machshir. So you see clearly that Rabbi Yehuda allows you to use for the schach of your sukkah a min that is not one of the four minim. You can use cedar. Rabbi Meir's moed shem yesh b'nesel neser kamali neser. Even though you have these boards of 3 tfachim that are puzzle, but if you have in between each board a blank space that you could fill with kosher schach, shemaniach pesel b'nei mukshera. And if you remember, the way this worked is because you were alternating, and you were starting from the outside of the sukkah and working your way in. So the outer 2 most boards were puzzle because they're too big. Then in between them there was kosher schach. Then in between them there was another set of boards, and then at the center there are two components of the kosher schach, because you're starting from one side, you have your strip of kosher schach, and you're starting from the other side, and you have your strip of kosher schach. So in the middle you had a minimum of 7 tfachim of kosher schach, and that's why the sukkah was kosher, because the sukkah was also not too big, and you were able to use doif and akuma to bring the wall up to the area in the center of the sukkah where you had 7 tfachim of schach. But I'll call upon him. So I'll call upon Rabbi Yehuda said that sichacha b'nesarim is kosher. So clearly you're using wood that's not the right species. But tomorrow, my erez hadas. You know what type of erez this is? What type of cedar wood is? It's the wood from a hadas bush. There's a shaila for Garish the next 3 lines, but we'll read it anyway. The Rabbi Barafuna, Dama Rabbi Barahuna, Amri Beirav, Asar Minei Rosenheim. There are 10 different types of wood that are all classified with the title Erez. So you see, it's even possible to have wood from a hadas tree that's referred to as Erez. And therefore, this brisa is not showing that Rabbi Yehuda holds that you're allowed to use something other than the Dal Minim. The Nesarim of a Rosam of Erez that this brisa was talking about is referring to wood from a hadas tree.
Is that, I thought a hadas came from a bush, not a tree.
Right, it's a bush. I guess you made a board out of a bush. I'm not sure how you would do that.
Yeah, I'm not either sure.
She's laughing. Listen, the cedar that you use when you do your cottage, is that made out of a hadas tree?
It's very interesting. You should know because a cedar tree has all sorts of forms. As a matter of fact, on our property of Yosy, we have cedar trees and we have cedar bushes, and they're all intrinsically the same species. Cedar is cedar. You have a cedar tree, you have a cedar bush, you have a cedar a plant.
So you're saying a chiddush. You're saying that you want to tiny that cedar, the cedar species comes in different forms, and therefore, could be you could have a cedar tree, and that's still considered from the Daled meaning.
Possibly,
even though you wouldn't technically cut your hadas from that one.
All I'm saying is that the leaves are identical and the wood is identical, but some of them grow as a tree and some of them grow as a bush. I have a cedar tree here. It's got to be 50 feet high.
Wow. Okay, so
that's a cedar tree, not a myrtle bush.
No, I'm only talking about cedar.
Yes.
If it could happen by that type of cedar, maybe the hadas also could grow in a different format.
Yeah, cedar trees, we understand cedar trees, but I never heard of a cedar bush. So you have a cedar bush as well in your property?
Yeah, for sure. Most of the trees, or put it this way, most of the bushes that surround properties, some of them even in Toronto, are cedar bushes.
So how do you know that? By the shape of the leaves?
Yeah, by the shape of the leaves, by the wood, by the everything. I mean, that it's well known that you can't just get a cedar. You have to specify what you want. If you want the plants to grow as a tree on your property or to grow as a bush, you have to specify what type of cedar plant you actually want, what type of landscaping you want.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody has cedar bushes around, and everybody has cedar trees around.
The trunk, a myrtle tree, can grow 20 to 40 feet high, apparently. Crepe myrtle tree. So it looks actually kind of interesting because there's a trunk, and then the shoots, which I guess is where we get the hadassim from, like shoot off from it. But there are various varieties that grow up to 40 feet. Some of them are only are shrubs that grow up to 10 feet tall, but there are crepe myrtles that have real trunks.
Gewaltig. So our Gemara knew that without Google.
Without Google.
But we have Google to help us at least understand the Gemara. Okay, Shnoy Chaim Tzvi. That's a beautiful point. I didn't cop that. Now I thought shot is that you made wood using the small branches. Some of you made the big plank. You said much better. You're saying the same species comes in different styles.
I remember my Auntie Rochel put a clothesline from one tree to another tree here in Belle York, and the two trees were cedar trees. I put a hammock between them. That's
in the front property.
That they're trees is that they are trees is not a chiddush. That an erez is a tree is not a chiddush. That it's a bush is a big chiddush.
Okay, gewaltig. So let's see the Gemara weiter. If Meir Amar feel about Mashiach, you could use strings. Tanya, because Meir says it doesn't have to be the min of the lulav with which you tie it. Tanya Reb Meir, Maisa be Akira Yerushalayim. There was a story with the Akira Yerushalayim, which I want to just focus back a little bit at the Mishnah. The Mishnah says Anshe Yerushalayim, and the Gemara says Akira Yerushalayim. They would tie their lovim with gold. So that was Meir's proof that you can use. That was Meir's proof that you can use another min. They told him not right. From there, from there you have a right to us because underneath they actually did a kosher igud. The shaila is, what is this brisa adding to the mix that the Mishnah didn't tell us? Usually when the brisa says something over, it never just repeats the same thing that the Mishnah says. It's adding some flavor. It's adding some information that we would otherwise not know. So one piece of information it tells us, it's not just the Anshe Yerushalayim, it's the Yakir Yerushalayim, which Rashi teaches as the shiny Eden, B'dafka, the wealthy Eden. It's the wealthy Eden that were able to wrap their lulavim with gold. But the other difference is it says as follows: Misham Raya, it says Misham Raya. Misham Raya means we're not just deflecting your Raya that there was you claimed that there was gold, so therefore you could use Einay Minay. We're deflecting it because maybe underneath they had something else. Rather, we're saying for sure you're wrong. We're bringing a raya for kert from there because we know for a fact that that they used the same min, they used a lulav leaf underneath the gold. If you look at the Mishnah carefully, the Mishnah doesn't say misham raya. The Mishnah just says meaning it's a deflection of your proof. You don't have a raya from the gold because maybe there was something underneath it. But the Brisa sticks in these extra words misham raya. Because the Bride is saying, we know for a fact that milamata, they had the kosher lulav branch, a lulav leaf, tying it up, and therefore we have a raya, in fact, that you have to use minay. Amalu Rava, lahani megadle hashayim. Rava said to the people, and megadle does not mean the people who plant, the farmers, they raise Hoshana. Megadle, Rashi says, comes from the lotion of gedilin tasalacho, making a braid. In other words, process. The people who used to process the Ishanis, Rabbi told them the following: the Reish Galusa, the people who worked in the house of the Reish Galusa, who were in charge of preparing the Ishanis. He said, "Kigedlisa Ishana, the Reish Galusa, when you prepare their Ishanis in their lulav, Shairu Bei Beis Yad, make sure that underneath where you bind it, so you're going to have your place where you tie the two minim to the lulav, make sure that below that area there's place where there's no binding, there's no tying, there's nothing there. So that when the person holds the lulav, he's holding the actual lulav and he's not holding the material that you use to tie it together. Why is that? So Rashi says, Shairu Bei Beis Yad mitachas la'eged. Below where you bound it, make sure there's some uncovered lulav. I don't want them to hold it by where it's tied together, which, by the way, is precisely where we hold our lulav. Right? We hold it from the kosher blach that holds everything together. But Rabbi did not want him to do that because he held that the egot is not part of the mitzvah. So therefore, it's just there for convenience or to make it look nice. That would be a chatzitza. Rava said, even if it's not a chiyuv to make igud, even if it's only to make it nice, but anything that's there to make something nice is not called a chatzitza. It's considered part and parcel of the same item, and there's no problem with chatzitza, which is what we do. Rava said another law. You shouldn't put a wrapper around your hand because the lekicha tama. You need a complete lekicha lekachtem, a lekicha tama, which means you have to hold it directly with your hand. Veleka. If you're wearing some glove or some shmata over your hand in between, it will be a problem. Rav Amar lekicha al yidei davar achar shema lekicha. If you're holding something like a glove on your hand, and with that you're holding it, that's not a problem. No, we said if it grows in a bottle, but you have to actually hold the esrog itself. So Tosfos struggles to understand what's the difference between this and the chatzitza. What's the difference? Why isn't this a chatzitza? If it's on your hand, why isn't that a chatzitza? And Tosfos struggles with it. We had a Gemara about a Kohanim that were very punished, scorned, because they wore gloves when they did avodah. They didn't want their hands dirty, which was terrible bejoinus. But let's have a look at the bottom of Tosfos, the final teretz of Tosfos. Tosfos did a masal de be'inan, so about 10 lines from the bottom in Tosfos, the yesh loymar. The mari she'asam in asudar kamin beis yad lelulav. A glove would be a chatzitza. So here what you did is you made with the sudar some type of case to hold the lulav. And therefore, bein shayach kan chatzitza. And therefore, you cannot say that this will be a chatzitza. Shekol halulav chutz miyadoi va'oichsai b'veis yad haboilet hanasim in a sudar. So you have some type of case that was made out of this shmata, and you're holding the whole lulav by holding on to this case. The dami la'ezai shesafka b'chut. It's very similar to the case that we're going to quote later. That if you are holding something through something else, that's not considered a chatzitza. That's considered like you're holding it properly. And therefore, there's no problem of chatzitza because this is not a chatzitza. This is the handle with which you're holding something. That would not be a problem. So Rabbi said, how can I prove to you? Where do I know from? How do I know that in fact is the way it is? Ditnan. Now the halacha is they used to carry the ingredients of the paraduma water, which would mean the water was kept separately and the earth was kept separately. They used to carry them in tubes, in long tubes. And they would use them even if they had to go to a remote location to do a zrika. There's someone Tameh in a city far away from Yerushalayim. They would actually transport the ingredients in a tube. And then what they would do is they would open up the water tube and pour that into the stone vessel. Then they would open up the earth tube and put it into a vessel, or sometimes they would mix it together. And then what they had to do is you had to take an azoi, which was a bundle of grass, and you had to dip it in to the mixture, and that's how you spritzed on the person. The problem was, let's say I have a tube that's 4 feet long, but I only have 1 foot of liquid at the bottom. That's my mixture. How am I going to get my grass down there if it's not long enough? So the Mishnah tells us, Ezev Kotzer, what if you had a short bundle of grass that if you pushed it in the edge of the 4-foot tube, you're going to be way too far away from the liquid at the bottom. So what would you do? Misafkoi b'chut, you would connect a rope to this bundle, ubakush, and then you would use a thin stick to push the azav down to the bottom of the cylinder, the toivel, and that would dip the azav into the cylinder, and then with the string you would pull it out. Umayla. Once you get the azav out, then you hold the azav in your hand directly, umaza, and then you spritz on whatever needs to be spritzed. Rashi comments, the same way you could dip it in to the water indirectly, why can't you spritz it indirectly? So Rashi says it's going to be very hard to aim the spritzing from the azav to go to the right place if you're holding the azav hanging off a long string. So for a practical reason, it's oiches the azav umasa. So frekt Rava, how could you dip the azav into the water without holding on to the azav itself? Indirectly through a rope and a probe. It says the pasuk gives very specific instructions as to how the zrika of the mayim of the paraduma has to work. It says v'lokach v'tovel, you have to take the azav in your hand and dip it into the water. You're not doing it. You're doing it by pushing it into the tube indirectly now with your hand and then pulling it out with a string. Don't you have proof from this halacha that lekicha al yidei dabaracha shma lekicha? It's considered like I'm taking it, even though I'm only holding the azav through a rope, which is what Tosfos was alluding to. If you're holding the lulav through a shmata, it's a lekicha al yidei dabaracha, and it's shma lekicha. Zok Gemara, mimai. From there, you don't have a right. Because Dilma Shiny Hasam, even the Chibre Kegufaydim, this string is not like a shmata that's loose. This is actually tied directly to the Azav. Maybe if it's tied directly to the Azav, there you say it's a Lakicha de Davrach, it's good enough. But in our case, the Lulav, you're holding it in something that's completely distinct and detached from the Lulav. How do you know that's considered a proper Lakicha? Rather, my raya is going to be from a different place. It says, Nafal mishvayferish l'shoikis. What happened if the earth that I'm supposed to pour into the earth that I'm supposed to pour into the container with the mayim chayim, what happens if I didn't pour it with knowledge? Rather, it fell, I dropped it, and the earth from this cylinder fell into the stone trough. Possible, it'll be possible. Because you didn't do lakicha, it happened by itself. However, if you poured the earth from this cylinder in, it'll be kosher, even though you didn't take it, the earth with your hand. The Torah said you must take the earth and you must put it into the water. You didn't take the earth and put it into the water. You poured it through the cylinder. You have proof from here that because this cylinder that's holding the earth is not connected to the earth, not tied to the earth, like the case of the Ezav earlier, and you're allowed to pour the earth from the cylinder into the water, even though you're not actually handling the earth itself. We have a raya that and therefore holding the lulav in Ashmata is also accepted. Rabbi said another rule about Hadassah, about a rubbish. You know, sometimes we take our lulav out of the bundle and we keep them separately, and then we put them back together. You should not do that, Rabbi. Why? Because the Dilma Nasri Tarfi, what are you going to do when you pull your lulav out of the bundle? It's inevitably going to rub against the hadassim and the aravis on either side. And what are you going to do if some leaves of the hadassim and the aravis fall into the core area that your lulav is supposed to be in? And when you put the lulav back in, those leaves might be adhered to the sides of that koshiko, it's called. And when you put the lulav in, the lulav now will not directly be touching the hadassim and the aravis, because there'll be a chatzitza of the torn off hadassim leaves and the aravis leaves that are going to be a hefsek, a chatzitza between the lulav and the hadassim and the aravis. So loylida tinish lulav by shana the domin nasr tarfi by the chatzitza, and that'll be a chatzitza. For Rav Amar, it's not a problem. Min b'mina nechaytzit. Having loose leaves of hadassim and aravis in between the lulav and the hadassim and the aravis is not a problem at all, because min b'mina is not chaytzit. But Marab, another thing. Imagine your lulav is in your bundle, and you decide that your lulav is too short. I'm sorry, you decide your lulav is too long, and you want to cut it. So if you cut the bottom of the lulav while it's in the bundle, what's going to happen is there's going to be some leaves that are still in the bundle that are no longer connected to the lulav. Because when you cut the lulav down low, you're also cutting some leaves that are extending further up. So you're going to have leaves of the lulav in the bundle that are not actually connected to the actual lulav itself. And that'll be chitit as well. There'll be some leaves that are not connected anymore to the lulav because you cut them off, but they'll still be held inside the bundle. That'll be a chatzitza. Rav Amar, once again, min b'mida it's not a concern. The hadas of a mitzvah, which means if you have a hadassim that you're using for your lulav, also lariachpo, you're not allowed to smell it on sukkis because it's muksa l'mitzvosai, and since it's huksa l'mitzvosai, you're not allowed to have a off of it. However, esrik shel mitzvah mutar lariachpo. The esrik you are allowed to enjoy the smell. Why is that? My time, what's the difference? Isn't esrog also hukshel mitzvah? Zok Rabba, there's a very big difference. Hadas, the hadas is normally used as a spice to smell. So therefore, ki aktzia, when you set it aside for the mitzvah, you're basically saying, I'm not going to use it. What it's normally used for is it's designated for the mitzvah. So what action am I prohibiting by designating it for the mitzvah? I'm saying I'm not going to smell it. It's not going to be for personal use. It's going to be for the mitzvah. But esrog, its primary purpose isn't to smell it. Its primary purpose is to eat it. Esrog de la chilakai, when you were mocked to the esrog, you're only mocked it from its main use, which is a chila, not from something else. So this is a very big kiddush. I would have thought that when you're making something huksa l'mitzvosai, it means it's huksa exclusively l'mitzvosai, and it can't be used for anything else. The Rabbah is teaching us a chiddush that the way muksa works is its primary intended purpose, that is prohibited. But other things that aren't its primary purpose are not prohibited. It's a very big chiddush, but I don't state in the Gemara. Lama Rabba, how about on a regular Shabbos? Are you allowed to smell hadassim that are mechuber on a regular Shabbos? So Lama Rabba, hadas b'mechuber mutar l'richtai. If you're walking in the garden and you see hadassim growing, you're allowed to smell them. Esrog b'mechuber, but if you have an esrog on a tree, also l'richtai, you're not allowed to go and smell it. My time, what's the difference? Hadas l'richtai. Hadas is designed to smell, and you could smell it and enjoy its smell without cutting it. So therefore, if we allow you to smell it, you're not going to cut it off because you smell the flowers as you walk by. You don't have to cut them off. But the primary purpose of an esrog is to eat. If you let him smell it, he might say, I like it. I'm going to have a bite out of it. You might either cut it or actually take a bite out of it, and that's why it's awesome. Lulav v'yamin, the lulav you hold in your right hand, the esrog v'smoil, and the esrog you hold in your left. My timer, hani tlasa mitzvahs. The lulav has 3 mitzvahs in it. The lulav dadasim daravis, v'achad mitzvah. And there are rishonim who hold that if you use it in the wrong hand, you're not yoytzer the mitzvah. There are actually rishonim who hold that way. My timer loymer v'chinim ela al nutilas lulav. Why do we make a bracha al nutilas esrog? Why do we only make al nutilas lulav? Amalai, he said, since the lulav is the tallest, we make the bracha on the lulav. Fact Gemara, for like Bila Esrog deliver. So just lift up the esrog high and then make the bracha on the esrog. Amalai, since the min of lulav is a taller peri, it's naturally taller. That's why we make the bracha on that mitzvah first. We make the bracha on the lulav. Okay, gewaltig. Zok the Gemara weiter.
One thing. Why should that be a criteria that it's taller? That means a taller person is more choshev? Does it mean that why is that such an important criteria?
So let's look at Rashi, because Rashi is sort of bavor jakasha. So Rashi is hoylu gavoy mukulam choshevu. That makes it the most prominent. The nikra ha'eged al shemoy. And when we refer to that bundle, we call it the lulav. We refer to the mitzvah using the most prominent component. So to answer your question, yes, someone taller is more prominent.
We have a raya from Shaul HaMelech. Shaul was described as being fit for Malchus, and then the pasuk added that he was a head taller than everybody else. I don't know why David.
Well, I'm familiar with the previous Gedalim, Rav Moshe and Rav Yaakov, and all of them were about 5 foot tall, and nobody questioned their chashivas because they were shorter.
Well, David HaMelech was also short.
David HaMelech short?
David HaMelech was very short, and he was a redhead.
Well, compared to Goliath, he was short. We don't know that he was shorter than. Do we know that he was shorter than?
I thought he was short. Yeah, he's like the smallest of the brothers. I heard he was very short and small.
Because he was just a kid. He didn't reach his full height yet at that time.
And I heard he was like tall like Napoleon.
Napoleon was actually of at least average height. It was Russian propaganda that said it was.
That was probably Plishtim propaganda that David was so small.
Okay, let's see the Gemara right there. The Heichen Hayuminanim. Where did they shake the lulav? Where did they shake the lulav? So even before we start, let me learn the Mishnah first, because this Mishnah opens up so many important things. So let me read the Mishnah. Heichen Hayuminanim. I have time, so let me talk a little bit about that. When are you supposed to make the bracha on the lulav? There are certain people who make the bracha first thing in the morning. There are certain people who do it in shul right before halal. So this is actually a big machlokes. It's a big machlokes of frame. There are those who learn that you're supposed to make it first thing in the morning. As a matter of fact, there are those who learn you're supposed to get up super early by nates on the first day of Sukkot so that you could be mekayim the mitzvah Zriza Makdimin as soon as possible, right at the nates. And their minhag was to shake B'dafka at home, not in shul, because nowadays we have sukkahs in shul. But in the olden days, people didn't have a sukkah in shul; they had a sukkah at home, and there's a special mitzvah to shake the lulav in the sukkah. So therefore, they would do it at home, and they would do it very first thing in the morning. That's how some people. That's how some people fear it. But then it says v'heichen hayumananim, which means let's think about it. The mitzvah is al natilas lulav. There's technically no mitzvah to shake, just literally to lift up the lulav and the esrog. The nanuim happen by halal. So it seems like the nanuim, clearly you see that the nanuim are a very serious part of the mitzvah. And therefore, there are those who learn that you should make the bracha al natilas lulav right before the nanuim, right before halal, because this way the bracha is as close as possible to the nanuim. We fear that we do a shtickle nanuim when we bench esrog even in the morning. We shake back and forth. We go to all four sides. But that's a majist and natilah. The nanuim are primarily during halal. That's why there are people who are makbid to make the bracha on the lulav and esrog right before halal, which is what a lot of people do. They go out to the sukkah right before halal and they make the bracha. Okay, so let's see what it says over here. So Rashi says, "Haidu shebetchilas haperek, v'haidu shebesoif haperek." So if we look in the Torah, it says "Haidu Hashem kila adam chastoi" is what it says at the beginning of the perek, and at the end of the perek, after An Hashem Ashina, An Hashem Aslichana, it says again "Haidu Hashem kitayv kila adam chastoi." Okay, that's one place where you shake. The next place where you shake is by Ana Hashem Ashiana, Divrei Beisel. So let's see Rashi again, because Rashi tells us a little bit of how they did this, in what order. It's at the end of Halal. At the beginning of Halal, at the end of Halal. Then Rashi tells us, when Haidu at Soif Halal, from Haidu until the end of Halal, Chade Parshasa, the meaning Parashas Sefer Tehillim. If you look at the Kapitach Tehillim, from Haidu Hashem, Kitayv Kila Chastoi, until the Haidu at the end is actually one kapitel of Tehillim. So that's what it means. At the beginning of the kapitel, the end of the kapitel. Vos epis, you're supposed to make nanuyim, Haidu Hashem. What's the significance of Haidu Hashem to make nanuyim? So Toshis tells us, I'm going to look here in Toshis where it says the Haidu. He brings down. It says, Oz Yiranenu Atzei Hayar. That's when the Atzei Hayar are going to sing, which is like Nanuim. It's when the Atzei Hayar are shaking. So it uses the words Oz Yiran Atzei Hayar right before Haidul Hashem K'toy, which tells us that you're supposed to shake during Haidul Hashem K'toy. Now, it's another interesting thing to point out is normally in a Mishnah, the Shita of Beis Shammai is quoted first, and then the Shita of Beis Hillel. While over here, it's exactly the opposite. We quoted Beis Hillel first. So those who learn, it's because we're going in order of Halal. By An Hashem Ashina, where Beis Hillel said you're supposed to shake, and Beis Shammai adds, after An Hashem Atzlichana, you should do it as well. So it's going in order. That's why it brought Beis Shammai second. The other Svara that's brought down why Beis Shammai is quoted here second is because it could be Beis Hillel not even ding zecham by Shammai. He's just saying you only have to shake by An Hashem Shina, but you're also allowed to shake by An Hashem Tzlichana. However, there's a lot of Torah on this. There's a lot of Torah on why you would shake by An Hashem Shina and why you would shake by An Hashem Tzlichana. And I want to see if Toshis mentions anything specifically about it. Let me just see. No, he doesn't. But I saw somewhere brought down that on Hashem Ashina, on Sukkos, we're davening Hashem should help us. So we're davening that we should have what we need to do avoid Hashem. On Hashem Aslichana is asking for a little bit more. We're pushing the envelope more. We're asking Hashem to give us more Gashmis. We want success. We want full success. So the sheet of Beis Hillel is we're only supposed to ask the Rebbeinu Shalom to help us in Ruchnius, to let us have to redeem us from our tzaras, our difficulties, so that we could at least be content and do avodas Hashem. Hashem tells Hashem, no, we want more. I don't want to just be content. I want to have a lot, and that's the shaila as to whether or not you're supposed to engage in that when we're davening on something.
Who says Hatzlacha is just restricted to the physical? It's you want to maybe understand the Gemara. Give me Hatzlacha, and then it shouldn't.
I guess whoever said what I quoted from not in his name, I guess that's called the Yeshua. Understanding what it's called the Yeshua. Hatzlacha is the 649, or maybe a Powerball.
If the debt collectors are coming, 649 might be.
Right, then that's called Hashiana already. Then the 649 becomes Hashiana. Okay. So I'm Rabbi Kiva. So if Yosy, Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Shua, I used to watch Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Shua to see how they davened by Hal. Everybody was shaking. We want that. We need it. They were satisfied just with shaking by Ana Hashem Hashiana. Tosfos has a lot of interesting things about the brachas. So let's look towards the end of Tosfos. Tosfos v'achshav shanohagi. So Tosfos is talking more practical as to what we do. So Tosfos says, let's see what time it is, 6:55. We'll just run through this and we'll stop. V'achshav shanohagu sheshlich tzibur omer yomer na Yisrael v'tzibur onin acharav haidu. Right. So when we say haidu yomer na Yisrael yomer na Beisar and yomer na Yerushem, the Shlich Tzibur says Yomina, but we always respond with Haidu. The Tzibur is supposed to shake every time we say Haidu, which I don't think is our minig, but that's the Tosfos is saying. So the Shlich Tzibur only shakes by the first Haidu, but the Tzibur is supposed to shake by all the Haidus. That's what Tosfos says. The Shlich Tzibur also shakes by each Haidu. So Tosfos brings a shita that the Shlich Tzibur shakes 4 times. I don't think we do that. We didn't find that when you make the bracha, you're supposed to make a nenua. You don't find it. We actually do, but we don't find it anywhere. So from there you could say the mashma that the bechilas bracha. Even though the cut can't rain halal, he doesn't know how to say halal, but if he knows how to shake a lulav, you let him shake it. So this is where maybe there's a makar, so when we make the bracha, if we shake lulav at home, we make the bracha, that we have to be menaneya, maybe you just have to lift it up. So that's a very important point. And the reason why it's an important point is, what position do we have the estrogen when we make the bracha? We always turn the estrogen upside down. Why? Because we don't want to be yotze the mitzvah. Because you don't need to shake to be yotze the mitzvah. The mere fact that you're holding it, you're yotze the mitzvah just for holding it. Nanua is a separate part of the mitzvah. There are those who are makbid, they feel it's too much of a hefsek to turn the esrog right side up from when it's upside down. And what they do is they hold the lulav in their hand and they keep the esrog on the table, but they're touching it. They're not holding it. And then as soon as they make the bracha, they lift it up because they feel it's less of a delay. So it's more overly stressful. We want the bracha to be as close to the mitzvah as possible. But I believe our minig is we actually hold the esrog in our hand. We just hold it upside down. And then after we make the bracha, we turn it right side up. Okay, I guess we can stop here.
You know, Yosy Zalman, it's interesting because an esrog grows up.
What were you saying, Haji?
An esrog grows upside down. So who is it to say which side the esrog, what way the esrog is upside down? Maybe the reason why people keep it on the table is because turning an esrog upside down is not really necessarily upside down.
I hear like an apple, for instance, the part that it hangs from is the top.
Right, but an esrog
But the esrog, the part that it hangs from, we consider the bottom.
Right.
So I guess the part that it hangs from doesn't determine that. Maybe you should look at a fruit, you can tell which is right side up. I'm not sure.
Maybe that's in order to get out of that headache, they keep it on the table.
I hear that's a good point. But it seems like
then they're holding the esrog entirely. But then they're holding the esrog the entire time upside down.
That's right. And then they would be yotze. That's a good point. That's a good point. It's a good horror. Okay, good. Gewaltig. Shkoyach.
All right. Have a good day, Colton.